Hi, I'm Dr. Darkley. It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Rebecca Whitney, who is the Global Spine President for ZimVie. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. It's my pleasure to speak with you today.
I'm very excited to talk about the Tether, which is a ZimVie device for non-fusion surgery to help correct adolescent idiopathic scoliosis and immature spines that are flexible as well. Many scoliosis patients and parents know this is used in a procedure known as vertebral body tethering. Now, VBT has grown in popularity probably exponentially over the last 3 or 4 years because parents are looking for an alternative to fusion. The Tether is also a personal pet project of mine because my son had that procedure performed about 3 years ago with Dr. Amr Samdani at Shriners Philadelphia. So very, very much acquainted with the process of the procedure. So I'm really excited to talk to you today, for sure. Now, I was told that I want to talk initially about the evolution of the Tether. I know it was origins date back to maybe 1989. It was kind of off-label with INEC. So I was wondering if you could talk about the evolution of the Tether from that period to now, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're exactly right. The current Tether product actually was born out of the original product that was called Dynasis. And it was actually named Dynasis for dynamic stabilization. And that product was a Zimmer spine product that was created to basically treat non-fusion or provide a non-fusion option for the lumbar spine. And it was really, in layman's terms, I think of it kind of as a string relief concept. So almost to protect either side of the construct to avoid some of that adjacent level disease that you tend to see with fusion. And so that's where the product originally started. And then what happened is a group of surgeon pioneers, including Dr. Amr Samdani, Feroz Mianji, Peter Newton, John Braun, to name a few others, they realized that there was an application for this technology off-label to basically start utilizing the product for a tether application. And so it started off as dynamic stabilization for the lumbar spine, evolved through some very thought-leading visionary surgeons, and then that product was used in an off-label manner for many years. And as we continued to see this evolution and the clinical promise this approach had, we actually worked in partnership with these surgeons to basically bring an on-label technology to the market, which is what the Tether is today. And that product was invented by our engineers in partnership with these surgeons and came onto the market in August of 2019 to provide an on-label application for what Dynasis had been slowly evolving into to treat this patient population.
Right. And I've talked to all of those surgeons actually regarding the research. And it's pretty fascinating because with Dr. Peter Newton, who's also an engineer as well, and Dr. Braun, they took me through the steps with the animal studies and what they were looking for and the evolution from even alternatives like staples, cables. It's pretty fascinating how this kind of technology evolves. So I know with ZimVie, they've been involving their instrumentation in terms of making it easier to use for surgeons. But the Tether itself, I guess, is based upon the technology from maybe 20 years ago. Is there any kind of evolution in technology for a new Tether that's coming out soon? That's basically the number one question for parents, so I thought I'd get that one out of the way.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the short answer is yes. It's been a really interesting process, and you kind of just ran through it. When we first brought the Tether to market in 2019, we were very careful to make sure that we leveraged a lot of the old design of Dynasis because it was important that we preserved the clinical history and the data that we were collecting to show that it worked. And so what we didn't want to do was launch a whole new product and kind of start from scratch. And so it's been a series of iterative improvements, I would say, but we're not done. We feel like we've just scratched the surface. And so the first step was bringing that to market on label, leveraging a lot of the Dynasis components to make sure that we salvage that clinical history because it's quite robust. What we've done since is make some enhancements to the instrumentation, specifically the tensioner. And what we're working on now is a next generation device that essentially improves all elements of the construct to make sure that we're constantly learning from the outcomes we've seen so far to make the device even more robust on the construct side of things. But we're also looking at ways to make the whole procedure more streamlined, reduce the learning curve, incorporate enabling technology where it makes sense to just make it that much more efficient. So we see this as an ongoing evolution. We do have active projects underway right now, but even with what we have in play today, we fully intend to continue to innovate because this space is relatively young. And even though there's been a lot of interest, to your point, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, we think we've just scratched the surface. And so part of our commitment and our passion is driving that continuous innovation so that the surgeons we partner with continue to feel even more confident with the procedure and continue to put tools in their hands that allow them to be even more proficient to drive those improved clinical outcomes. So we're very excited about it, and we're super committed to continuing to innovate for as long as we need to.
When you talk about construct and you talk about instrumentation, I know that ZimVie is making it easier and easier for the surgeons to use the instrumentation. And with respect to the tether itself, can you talk at all about what we can expect in terms of new technology for that?
Yeah, so one of the things we're focused on is, well, I'll start with the implants themselves. We want to be sure that those are very robust, and especially as they interface with the cord, which is obviously a critical part of the procedure, we want to be sure that we're designing a construct that improves the overall strength. So cord breakage, which is a known factor of the tethering procedure, which always isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way. As the patient grows and as they straighten out, that cord is doing its job. And so what we are working on is making sure we can predict when and how that cord will break so that the surgeon has more control over when it happens. So I think that's a very important point when we talk about construct strength. We're talking about finding that balance between, of course, maintaining the flexibility of the construct because that's what provides the non-fusion option. If we go too firm, you might as well just be fusing. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there's that fine balance there. So we're trying to fine tune the construct cord interface, as well as ensure that the screws and everything else are as solid as they need to be. So that's one. And then the instrumentation, making sure that the tensioner and the way that the instrumentation basically interfaces with the implant is as solid as it needs to be. Right now, because it's still relatively early on, there's a little bit of an art that is applied. So each surgeon has fine-tuned the way they approach their surgery. And what we would like to do was help take some of that guesswork out to make it a more repeatable procedure in the hands of every surgeon that adopts the technology. And we think that some of our instrument enhancements will help us do that, just to provide that predictability that I think many surgeons, especially earlier usage surgeons, are really looking for. Those that are very proficient have figured this out. What we're now trying to do is take those learnings from these thought leader surgeons and build that into our innovation so that we provide something that kind of takes the guesswork out of it, especially for earlier usage surgeons.
Basically, with the tether ruptures, has ZimVie determined to what's actually causing the tether ruptures? Are there 2 or 3 factors, or is it many factors? Can you speak to that?
Yes, it's a great question, and it's obviously an area of high interest for us, both our engineering team as well as our research lab. So we've put a lot of time and energy into examining that because if we can replicate the problem, then we can solve for it. And so we've made a lot of progress, even in recent months, to really understand that. And there are a couple of different failure modes. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we are taking those learnings and making sure we address that in this next generation device. Because again, if we can identify where and why the product is rupturing, it allows us to engineer it in a way where we have control over that and can make sure that it's happening at the appropriate time in the treatment of the patient. So we're really encouraged with what we found and believe that we've got a clear path forward to address some of these concerns.
Having talked to a number of surgeons, do you think it's a combination between the screw interface and the tether material?
That is definitely one. Yeah, Yeah, that's definitely one area, because obviously as the cord is interfacing with the set screw, and it moves throughout that construct, it provides some wear and tear. So yes, that is one area where we see cords fail, definitely.
In terms of the next generation tether itself, are the engineers going towards a totally different material? Are they using the current material in a different manner?
Right now, everything's on the table. We're kind of in that early stage exploration standpoint, which is fun. And we've looked at all of the above. I think that what we don't want to do is sacrifice what we know works. And so it's always a balance of building upon what we know works and is providing good results, but always looking to make that even better and more impactful. So it is probably unlikely that we would move away from everything and start over. We're more looking at how do we enhance that. And if the testing comes back and shows that a different material is superior, we'll go down that path. But we're also trying to build upon the history that we had and the strong clinical outcomes we've experienced so far. So it's going to be a balance. But unless there's a really solid reason to move away from what we've already been working on, the idea is to make that even better versus completely change and start over.
No, I do love the idea of the predictability of the construct and the tether. And because I know initially that with VBT, surgeons were thinking initially that they were always going to have to do a revision to cut the tether because they wanted the tether to be freed up once the child or the adolescent hit maturity to increase spine mobility, because there is reduction in flexibility with the tether. So it's almost as if you need a self-destruct mode where the tether will rupture at a certain time, maybe 2 years after hitting maturity, so everything can free up again. So it's a very interesting engineering challenge for sure.
It is, and it's funny you mentioned the self-destruct button because I've had surgeons use that exact phrase with me many times, as recently as a few weeks ago at the SRS conference in Sweden, because that ability to kind of tell it when to turn off would be ideal. So those are the other things we're working on from a research perspective, is just studying that and trying to understand what would that look like. And to your point, it's a great engineering challenge. Our engineers are very passionate about understanding every element of this and making sure we design in whatever we can to help give more control over that.
Are the engineers also thinking about adding some kind of metal fiber or filament to the tether to actually determine if there is a tether breakage or something along those lines?
Yeah, I don't know how far we've gone down that particular concept, but it has been something that's come up in conversation as well. So the way we kind of think about this is we take feedback from our big surgeon users. The engineers also work on research down in the lab, and we just compile all of these ideas and then kind of test them in isolation and in concert with each other to say what might stick. So I think the fun thing is nothing's really off the table. And I think this next generation device gives us an opportunity to kind of think all this up and then test it out and see what's feasible and what's not, and where we'll have the most clinical value to the product and the procedure.
This is a follow-up question, probably the last question about the tether, so we can move on. Basically, the tether technology, is there a timeline in terms of 2 years, 3 years, when we would be able to expect tether technology being available?
Yeah, so it's not publicly disclosed, but we're working aggressively to ensure that we keep this very current. So it's a top priority for us, and it will be here sooner than later, but really can't give a firm timeline for that. What I will say, though, is we're looking for iteratively improving some of the things along the way. So we're not going to wait until this is completely ready. We've seen that already with some of our instrument enhancements, and we'll continue to do that. So we kind of step into this so we don't wait until it's all ready to go. We'll be hoping to improve things along the way while we get to that point.
When we talk about surgeon training, because I was doing one of my earlier interviews with Dr. Bob Cho out in Pasadena at Shriners, and who incidentally observed my son's VBT with Dr. Sandan in Philly. So it's kind of interesting how everything connects anyway. But when I interviewed him, he was talking a little bit about how ZimVie has organized a lot of the training programs for surgeons, just that, as you mentioned beforehand, have some kind of standardization to train the surgeons properly, because you want them to be able to use your technology to its full potential, right? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I would say that as much as we focus on engineering and innovation, we put an equal amount of focus and resources into the surgeon training piece of this, because we know that surgeons have varying levels of comfort with taking something like this on. And so it's important to us that we develop the market very responsibly. And that means ensuring that surgeons are trained properly on how to do this procedure. Their comfort level and their confidence is critical, obviously, as you're looking to build adoption of a relatively new procedure. So we have a wonderful medical education team that has customized the training approach. So we offer a variety of modalities, basically, to kind of meet the surgeon where they are with their experience level and their comfort level. I would say that the most impactful thing we do is utilize these thought-leading surgeons to basically provide one-to-one hands-on training for newer surgeons. So sending somebody out to Dr. Samdani, for example, or up to see John Braun, and spend time with them in the operating room, reviewing case studies with them, really getting a feel for how they approach the entire patient selection process. So it's kind of a soup to nuts approach where we are able to meet that surgeon and kind of customize the process for them to get them what they need. The other interesting thing that we've done more recently is we now have a virtual reality setup that's a headset, basically, that allows, we can ship these out to surgeons, and they can basically kind of practice the procedure as often as they want or need through this virtual reality environment, which is kind of fun. So that doesn't take the place of everything else I mentioned, but it's been a nice augment, I would say, to everything else we have going on. And then the last thing we do is we'll bring surgeons out here to Colorado on a regular basis with our surgeon faculty to really teach them the ins and outs of how to do this procedure. And I think what's nice about that group setting is you're able to benefit from everyone's shared experiences of what they learned early on, how they selected their patients, and then of course how to perform the procedure. So it's a pretty comprehensive area that we've invested in, and we will continue to invest heavily in, because in my opinion, you can have the best product in the world, but if you're not investing the same amount of energy to properly train people on how to use it, people are going to give up before they start, and even worse, could have some adverse outcomes, which doesn't do the procedure or the patients any good. So we take it very seriously. We have a very robust certification program to get surgeons up and running, and I have a lot of flexibility within that to ensure that we're providing something for everybody.
Well, when you get a chance, can you send me one of those virtual reality tools, please?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Assuming that, I'm sure ZimVie collects tons of data, have you noticed any particular trends in terms of successes that you've noticed over the last few years?
Yeah, so we have the benefit of leveraging a lot of the data that was collected before the Tether came onto the market. So we actually have about 7 or 8 years of follow-up now, and that's helpful. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't completely deviated away from the older designs, because again, we want to preserve that continuity in terms of the clinical story here. So what we're finding is that most patients do very well. It's still early on, and we're still right in the middle of this IDE, but the preliminary results look very promising. And I think one of the biggest areas is lifestyle related. And we all know that Fusion does a very nice job of performing the correction. So this is not necessarily how we stack up next to Fusion. It's more around how does this impact the patient? And I would say more than anything else we do, this is a patient lifestyle story, because the data that we're collecting and some of the positive outcomes that are coming out of this are the stories that are centered around getting back to sports in a relatively short time period, being able to continue on with cheerleading, gymnastics, dance, horseback riding. So we see this lifestyle story while at the same time, the clinical need is also met. And so for me, I think it's that lifestyle piece is probably equally, if not more important than what it's doing to straighten out the spine. But that data is also very good as well. So we collect it, and we're in several study groups to ensure that we add to that robustness. Because when we think about innovation, it's not just product innovation, it's that clinical innovation. And we can't do that without collecting the data and really analyzing that and understanding what's working and where we have room to make the procedure even better.
With respect to the tether, I know it was designed primarily for adolescent with scoliosis. I know some surgeons are using the tether on a little bit more mature spines as well, in terms of, I guess if I can review, the idea with the VBT with immature spines is using potential growth, bone growth modulation. And as the adolescent continues to grow, the spine will straighten a little bit, and it will stabilize once that child hits maturity, so that the curve won't revert. Now, if it's done, the procedure is done in a more mature spine, there's less growth potential. And the fear is that with tether breaks, then the curve might revert. Do you have any stats or any support in terms of, or any information with respect to a little bit more of a mature spine tethering at this point?
Yeah, so it's definitely not on label. It's not indicated for treating a mature spine. So our indications are pretty narrow, and that was intentional. So again, the surgeons can make their call in terms of who they treat, obviously, but we don't really get involved with anything related outside of those indications because it's not really our place to do that. We feel very strongly that we need to do this very responsibly, and what surgeons choose to do in their own practice is, of course, entirely up to them. And you're right. I think some of these surgeons feel very passionately that there is application beyond the pediatric market. But as far as we've taken it thus far, it's very limited to the pediatric patient population. So our data collection and our research so far has been centered on the pediatric market. That's not to save it down the road for maybe a new product or a new indication. We could look at some of that. I think one of the benefits here is our history with this type of a device. But for now, we really try to stay extremely focused on those approved indications.
Just one follow-up question I had is respect to surgeons. Have you noticed, because I know parents and patients are looking for alternatives or options to fusion, to traditional fusion. And I guess the market will shape demand. Have you noticed that there has been an increase in popularity of VBT inquiries from spine surgeons and more uptake with that procedure?
Yeah, without question. And I think there are a couple of things driving it. I think if you think about the macro healthcare environment we live in, the informed healthcare consumer is definitely something that we see as a growing trend. And that spans way beyond spine, but just this idea that patients are doing their own research now and they're seeking out alternatives. The internet, of course, has made that very easy, but it's very rare anymore that a patient shows up uninformed and just accepts what the surgeon tells them as the first order of business. And so what we found is that that's actually allowing patients and patients' families, and in this case, parents, to really challenge the status quo. And they're coming in very informed. They've done their research. And in many instances, they're saying, I don't want my child to be fused. So that's definitely driving a lot of this, I would say, patient-driven demand. Amazing consortium of information. And these parents find each other on this Facebook group, and they connect with the surgeons that they know are doing this procedure, like Dr. Samdani, and they're able to talk in this open forum about what to look for, what patient indications should look like, which surgeons are doing this. So that's also created a lot of buzz, I would say, at the patient level. And so what we find is that many surgeons are saying, hey, I don't even have to ask or talk about this. Patients and their parents are coming to me saying, I've done my research, this is what I want. And when they're not indicated, sometimes the surgeon actually has to talk them out of it. So we definitely see a patient demand growing. And I think as this popularity and procedure continues to grow, we fully expect that to continue.
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty fascinating in terms of, as a parent myself, and having gone through, my son gone through the procedure, it really makes a difference in terms of, I found, even talking with the surgeons, with the interviews I've done, is that typically the best surgeons are the ones who want their prospective patients as educated as possible. Because when you go in with knowledge, it's much easier to make shared decision making together as a group in terms of just for the benefit of the child at this point, right? So knowledge is key, and the best surgeons want the most informed patients.
I love it. I could not agree with you more. And I think what's really interesting about this specific procedure is you've got passionate parents, passionate surgeons, and we're obviously passionate about this too. And so you kind of get this coming together of everybody trying to do what's right for the patient when they're indicated, recognizing it's not always the appropriate procedure. But I think you're absolutely right. And the surgeons we work with love that informed patient because they feel like they're able to have an informed, educated conversation around options, which is a whole lot better for the surgeon, I think, than trying to explain something that maybe seems unfamiliar or unknown and therefore isn't necessarily going to be an option. So it's been really fun to watch that part of it come together.
Okay. Absolutely. Just a couple of follow-up questions. Do you have a general idea of how many VBT procedures have been performed? And I know that ZimVie is primarily North American brand right now, but it has been launching throughout the rest of the world as well, in Europe, et cetera. Can you talk about those two topics?
Yeah, absolutely. So we track this pretty closely. As of last month, since we received FDA approval, we had treated over 1,200 children with the Tether. So that's about 400 procedures a year. It's been growing. So that number is a little higher in 2022 compared to the year we launched. But yeah, over 1,200 kids and counting, which is a big source of pride for our internal team as well, knowing that they're changing these kids' lives. So that's exciting. And to your other point, and in the US, of course, we're the only device that has this approval. So in terms of market share, in the US, it's us. And then globally, we still have the lion's share. Globus is our competitor, obviously. But in terms of global expansion, it's been really fun. France, for example, just this past month had a blowout month. So they're really kind of ramping up Tether in France, Italy, Spain, Puerto Rico, Hong Kong. So we're starting to see these countries all over the world adopt the procedure and really start to take hold with it. So that's been really great too, because it's just important to us. Our mission as a company is restoring daily life. And in our spine division, it's all about motion sparing and motion preserving alternatives. And so we feel really strongly about making sure that we live out that mission. And so seeing this technology grow, not just in the United States, but around the world, has been really validating and fulfilling to see kids get access to what we believe is a better option to fusion.
Excellent. Do you have any kind of directory or resource where prospective patients or parents can find more information about where to find particular surgeons for this particular technique?
We do. So we have a website. It's called myscoliosis.com. And it's a wealth of information, just resources, education materials, what to look for. So a lot of good stuff. But one of the most valuable pieces of that website is our surgeon locator, where you can put in your zip code and basically find a surgeon who's been Tether certified that's close to you. And in some cases, not as close as we would like because we're still in the early stages. But regardless, it gives these parents and these patients immediate access to find surgeons who have been trained and certified and are performing the Tether actively. So it kind of shortchanges the search process, if you will, and sends them right into the hands of surgeons that are very proficient with the procedure and are very activated when it comes to offering tethering.
Rebecca, do you have any other comments you'd like to?
I would just say that, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, our team is so passionate about this technology. It's a passion project for many of us, myself included. And outside of work, when people ask me what I do for a living, I find myself always gravitating toward talking about the Tether because spine is important, treating spine pathology is important. That's even more true for pediatric patient populations, and even more so when you're kind of talking about a solution that changes a child's lifestyle, not just for the year they're getting the surgery, but for years and years to come. So I just feel very fortunate to work in an organization where we've been able to make this a priority and work with some of the best surgeons in the industry to continue to move this forward. So as I mentioned before, we've just scratched the surface we're extremely committed to the space and just couldn't be more excited to watch it continue to evolve, and feel really lucky that we've got such strong partnerships with so many passionate people, whether it's the patients, the parents, the surgeons, as well as our internal team. So it's a real pleasure to work on this, and by far the most exciting part of my job. So it's really fun.
Well, your passion totally comes through, and I know that the surgeons are the same. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for spending some time with me today, and I know the viewers are going to enjoy the interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. It's my pleasure.